Shadows behind the mask. The heavy clouds over Manhattan loomed ominously as Eleanor Grayson stared out of her penthouse window, a glass of untouched wine in her hand. Her world had always seemed picture-perfect, a powerful family legacy, 2 doting children, and a husband, Nathan, whose charisma could charm anyone in the room. Yet beneath the surface, there had always been an undercurrent of something darker, a tension she could never quite place. Tonight, however, felt different. The emptiness in the air gnawed at her, more insistent than ever. It was Nathan's birthday, and the grand celebration was set to begin in mere hours. Eleanor had spared no expense to ensure that the event would be nothing short of spectacular. CEOs, artists, and even a senator were on the guest list, all eager to rub elbows with one of the city's most prominent couples. Yet, despite the facade of opulence, Eleanor couldn't shake the sense that something was terribly wrong. In the sprawling ballroom below, staff moved with rehearsed precision. The centerpiece chandelier glittered like stardust, casting fractured beams of light across the room. The soft notes of a live quartet rehearsing filled the air. Eleanor adjusted the emerald necklace Nathan had gifted her on their 10th anniversary, its cold weight a sharp contrast to the warmth of the memories it once symbolized. Her sister-in-law, Sylvia, breezed in, her usual air of superiority trailing behind her. "You've outdone yourself, darling," Sylvia purred, her eyes flitting over the decor before landing on Eleanor. "Nathan's lucky to have you. If only he showed it more." Eleanor stiffened, masking her discomfort with a polite smile. "He's been busy. Business has been demanding, as you know." Sylvia smirked. "Of course. That's what they all say." The insinuation hung in the air as Sylvia sauntered away, leaving Eleanor simmering in a cocktail of doubt and unease. Sylvia's words were a seed of suspicion, but they weren't the first. Over the past year, Eleanor had noticed Nathan's frequent absences, the hushed phone calls, and the excuses that seemed too conveniently timed. Still, she had buried her doubts under layers of trust, unwilling to confront the cracks in their marriage. As the first guests began to arrive, Eleanor put on her practiced smile, her role as the perfect hostess taking over. Nathan was the star of the evening, effortlessly charming as he moved from group to group, his deep laughter echoing above the hum of conversation. Watching him, Eleanor couldn't help but feel a pang of something she couldn't quite name. Nostalgia. Loss. Anger? She excused herself, needing a moment of solitude. As she ascended the grand staircase toward her private office, the faint sound of voices stopped her. The door to Nathan's study was ajar, and the soft glow of a desk lamp spilled into the dim hallway. "Do you think she suspects anything?" a woman's voice asked, sharp and confident. Eleanor froze, her heart pounding. She inched closer, careful to stay out of sight. "Eleanor." Nathan's voice was low, almost dismissive. "She's clueless. Always has been. Just keep playing your part, and everything will go smoothly." Her breath hitched. Clueless? Playing a part? What was he talking about? The woman chuckled. "You're bold, Nathan. But if we're caught, this entire scheme will crumble. Are you sure the funds are secure?" "Absolutely," Nathan replied. "By the time anyone notices, we'll be untouchable." Eleanor's world tilted. Funds? A scheme? Her mind raced as the voices faded. She pressed her back against the wall, struggling to process what she had just overheard. Nathan, the man she had built her life with, was hiding something monumental. But what? And who was the woman with him? Returning to the ballroom, Eleanor felt as though she was moving through a dream. The faces of their guests blurred, their laughter a distant echo. Nathan's betrayal, whatever it was, cast a shadow over everything. And yet she knew she couldn't let it show. Not here. Not now. As the night wore on, she observed him more closely than ever before. His charm felt rehearsed, his smiles too perfect. The man she thought she knew was a stranger, and she realized with a sinking feeling that she had no idea how deep his deception ran. The next morning, Eleanor sat alone in her private sitting room, her laptop open on the polished mahogany desk. Sleep had eluded her, and the questions swirling in her mind demanded answers. She began combing through their financial records, her heart sinking with every click. Large sums of money had been transferred out of their joint accounts over the past year, redirected to a series of shell companies she didn't recognize. The names on the transactions were carefully disguised, but one stood out: Helena Ward Investments. Helena Ward. Eleanor whispered the name aloud, her voice trembling. Was this the woman she had overheard? And if so, who was she? A quick search revealed a Helena Ward as a prominent figure in the art world, known for her gallery of controversial pieces. But as Eleanor dug deeper, she uncovered whispers of scandals, lawsuits, and a history of relationships with powerful men. Was Nathan funding her, supporting her, or was it something worse? That evening, as Nathan returned home, Eleanor met him with a calm she didn't feel. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. He hesitated, his easy smile faltering for just a moment. "Of course," he said, setting his briefcase down. "What's on your mind?" Eleanor held his gaze, searching for any flicker of guilt. "Helena Ward," she said simply. Nathan's face drained of color, his mask slipping for the briefest moment before he recovered. "What about her?" "I want the truth, Nathan. All of it." For the first time in their marriage, Eleanor saw fear in his eyes. But whether it was fear for her or for himself, she couldn't tell. "You don't understand," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me," she demanded, her voice rising. "What have you done? What have you gotten us into?" Nathan looked away, his jaw tightening. "It's complicated," he said finally. Complicated wasn't good enough. Eleanor's trust had been shattered, and she knew there was only one way to uncover the truth. If Nathan wouldn't give her answers, she would find them herself, no matter the cost. Web of deception. Eleanor sat in the darkened room, her fingers trembling as they hovered over the keyboard. The early morning glow filtered through the curtains, painting her office in a muted golden hue, but her mind was far from serene. She replayed Nathan's words from the night before. "It's complicated." It was an excuse, a shield to keep her at bay, and she refused to let it stand. Her laptop screen displayed the financial statements again. Every suspicious transaction was now highlighted in a separate document she had compiled overnight. Each transfer, each shell company, pointed to one conclusion: her husband was siphoning money. But why? And for whom? The name Helena Ward loomed over her thoughts like a dark cloud. Who was this woman to Nathan? How deep did their connection run? Eleanor's chest tightened as she imagined the worst, but she pushed the emotions aside. She needed facts, not assumptions. Determined to learn more, Eleanor picked up her phone and made a call. "Clara," she said when the line connected. Her voice was firm, though her heart raced. "I need your help." Clara Whitmore had been Eleanor's best friend since college, a fiercely intelligent private investigator who had built a reputation for uncovering even the most well-buried secrets. If anyone could help her get to the bottom of this, it was Clara. "Eleanor," Clara greeted, her tone warm but cautious. "What's going on? You sound off." Eleanor hesitated, then took a deep breath. "It's Nathan. I think he's hiding something. Something big." There was a pause on the other end before Clara responded, her voice now sharper. "Tell me everything." By the time Eleanor finished explaining, Clara's demeanor had shifted entirely. "This Helena Ward character sounds like trouble," Clara said. "If she's tied to those shell companies, she's either laundering money or part of something much bigger. Either way, you're right to be suspicious." "What do I do?" Eleanor asked, her voice betraying a hint of vulnerability. "You let me dig," Clara replied. "But in the meantime, you keep playing your part. Don't let Nathan know you're onto him. If he's involved in something dangerous, you don't want to tip your hand too soon." Eleanor nodded, though Clara couldn't see it. "Thank you." "You don't need to thank me," Clara said. "Just be careful. This might be bigger than you think." For the next few days, Eleanor followed Clara's advice. She maintained the facade of the dutiful wife, attending social functions with Nathan, and playing the role of the perfect hostess. But beneath her composed exterior, her mind raced with questions and doubts. Clara, meanwhile, worked quickly. Within 48 hours, she called Eleanor with her first findings. "Helena Ward is more than just an art dealer," Clara began. "She's a facilitator, a middleman for high-profile clients looking to move money discreetly. She's been linked to several scandals, but nothing's ever stuck. She's good at covering her tracks." "And Nathan?" Eleanor asked, her voice tight. "There's no direct connection yet," Clara admitted. "But I found something interesting. One of the shell companies tied to the transfers, Archer Holdings, is registered to an address in the Cayman Islands. That same address is tied to a private account under Nathan's name." Eleanor's stomach dropped. "So it's true." "It looks that way," Clara said. "But there's more. Archer Holdings isn't just a shell company. It's tied to a broader network, a group that moves money for clients across industries. Some of the names I found are concerning." "What do you mean?" "I mean powerful people, Eleanor. Politicians, CEOs, even international figures. If Nathan's mixed up with these people, it's not just about money. It's about power, and that's a dangerous game." That evening, Eleanor confronted Nathan again, though this time she chose her words carefully. She didn't want to reveal how much she knew, not yet. "Nathan," she began as they sat in the living room, the flicker of the fireplace casting shadows on the walls. "Have you been feeling overwhelmed lately?" He looked up from his phone, surprised by the question. "Overwhelmed? What do you mean?" "I mean with work, with everything," she said, keeping her tone light. "You've been so busy, and I worry about you." Nathan's expression softened, though it didn't feel genuine. "I'm fine, Eleanor. Just a lot on my plate. That's all." She studied him, searching for any hint of sincerity. "If there's anything you want to talk about, anything you need help with, you can tell me. You know that, right?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Of course." As the silence stretched between them, Eleanor felt a pang of frustration. She was trying to give him an out, a chance to come clean, but he was sticking to his script. The next day, Eleanor received another call from Clara. "I found something else," Clara said, her voice urgent. "Helena Ward is hosting a private event tomorrow night, an auction at her gallery. The guest list is exclusive, but Nathan's name is on it." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. He didn't mention anything about it. "Of course not," Clara said. "But here's the kicker. The auction isn't just for art. It's a front for high-stakes dealings, the kind of transactions that never see the light of day." "I need to be there," Eleanor said without hesitation. "I can get you in," Clara replied. "But you need to be careful. If Nathan sees you, it could blow everything." "I'll take that risk," Eleanor said. "I need to know the truth." The following evening, Eleanor stood outside Helena Ward's gallery, her pulse racing. The building was sleek and modern, its glass facade glowing with soft golden light. Well-dressed guests filtered inside, their laughter and chatter muffled by the thick doors. Clara had secured an invitation for Eleanor under an alias, complete with a designer dress and accessories that screamed wealth and influence. As she stepped inside, she felt a rush of adrenaline. This was a world she knew well: opulence, power, and carefully constructed facades. But tonight, she wasn't here to mingle. She was here to uncover the truth. The gallery was a maze of abstract sculptures and vibrant paintings, each piece carefully curated to distract from the true purpose of the event. Eleanor scanned the room, her eyes searching for Nathan. She found him near the back, standing with a group of men in tailored suits. His hand rested lightly on Helena Ward's arm as they laughed at something she said. The sight sent a jolt of anger through Eleanor, but she forced herself to remain calm. Clara's voice echoed in her mind. Keep your head down. Observe. Don't engage. As the evening progressed, Eleanor noticed subtle signs of the gallery's true purpose. Guests exchanged hushed whispers, their eyes darting around nervously. At one point, a man slipped a briefcase to another, their movements so discreet that most wouldn't have noticed. But Eleanor did. When the auction began, Eleanor positioned herself near the back, blending into the crowd. The items on display ranged from rare paintings to obscure artifacts, but the real action was happening offstage. Clara had warned her about the coded bidding system, and Eleanor watched closely as Nathan raised his hand for an item that didn't seem particularly valuable, a plain bronze sculpture. Lot number 27, the auctioneer announced, sold to Mr. Grayson for $200,000. The number was outrageous for such a modest piece, but Eleanor understood immediately. The sculpture was a cover, a way to move money without raising suspicion. Her suspicions were confirmed when she overheard Helena and Nathan speaking after the auction. The funds will be transferred by tomorrow, Nathan said, his tone confident. Everything's in place. Good, Helena replied. You're a valuable asset, Nathan. Let's keep it that way. Eleanor left the gallery that night with a storm of emotions swirling inside her. Anger, betrayal, determination. Nathan wasn't just hiding an affair. He was deeply entangled in a world of corruption and deceit. But as much as she wanted to confront him, she knew it wasn't the time. She needed more evidence, a way to expose him and his accomplices without endangering herself or her children. Clara's words echoed in her mind. This might be bigger than you think. And Eleanor was beginning to realize just how true that was. Cracks in the foundation. The following morning, Eleanor sat at the kitchen island, her coffee untouched. The events of the previous night at Helena Ward's gallery replayed in her mind like a fragmented dream. Nathan's smug confidence, Helena's subtle manipulation, and the coded auction. All of it painted a picture of a man she no longer recognized. The person she had trusted with her life was complicit in something far darker than she had anticipated. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. Alice, her eldest, appeared in the doorway, her face a mixture of teenage indifference and subtle concern. "Mom, you've been staring at that coffee for 10 minutes," Alice said, sliding into the seat opposite her. "Is everything okay?" Eleanor forced a smile. "Just tired, sweetheart. How's school? Are you ready for your big test?" Alice frowned, her usual sass replaced with a rare vulnerability. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something." She hesitated, chewing her lip before continuing. "Dad's been acting weird lately." Eleanor's pulse quickened. "Weird how?" Alice shrugged, her gaze dropping to the table. "I don't know. He's been on his phone a lot more, always stepping out to take calls. And last week, I heard him talking about moving money or something. It didn't sound like his usual business stuff." Eleanor's heart ached at the thought of Alice noticing Nathan's deception. She reached across the table, taking her daughter's hand. "Alice, listen to me. No matter what's going on, I'm going to make sure we're okay. You and your brother don't need to worry about any of this." Alice nodded, though the tension in her shoulders remained. I don't want anything bad to happen, Mom." Eleanor squeezed her hand, her resolve hardening. "It won't. I promise." Later that day, Eleanor met Clara in a discreet cafe on the outskirts of the city. Clara had brought her laptop, a folder of printed documents, and the same sharp focus Eleanor had always admired. "I've been digging into Archer Holdings and the other shell companies," Clara began, spreading out the documents. "And I've found a pattern. Every company tied to Nathan has transactions linked to a single offshore account. The account belongs to a trust registered under the name Orion Ventures." "Orion Ventures," Eleanor repeated, frowning. "What is it?" "It's a front," Clara explained. "A high-level clearinghouse for illegal transactions. Think money laundering, bribery, black market dealings. It's run by a syndicate with connections across multiple industries, including finance and politics. Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. And Nathan is involved. Clara nodded. He's not just involved. He's a key player. From what I can tell, he's been facilitating transactions for the syndicate using his reputation and your family's resources as cover. The weight of the revelation was staggering. Nathan wasn't just lying to her. He was jeopardizing everything. Their family, their legacy, their safety. Eleanor's mind raced as she tried to piece together the implications. "Do you think he knows how much danger he's putting us in?" she asked, her voice trembling. Clara hesitated. "If he does, he's gambling that the payoff will be worth the risk." "But Eleanor, there's more." "What is it?" Clara leaned closer, lowering her voice. "I've been tracking Helena Ward as well. She's not just a middleman, she's a handler. Her job is to recruit people like Nathan, people with influence and access, and pull them into the syndicate's orbit. Once they're in, they're trapped." Eleanor's jaw tightened. So Nathan didn't just stumble into this. He was targeted. "Exactly," Clara confirmed. "And now that he's in, they're using him for everything he's worth. If he steps out of line, they'll destroy him. And anyone close to him." Eleanor returned home that evening, her mind a whirlwind of anger and determination. Nathan was playing with fire, and the flames were inching closer to her children. She couldn't sit by and let it happen. If he wouldn't protect their family, she would. The opportunity came sooner than she expected. That night, as Nathan slept, Eleanor crept into his home office. The room was immaculate, every surface perfectly arranged, a reflection of Nathan's obsessive need for control. She approached his desk, her hands trembling as she opened the top drawer. Inside, she found a sleek black notebook. Flipping through it, she discovered pages filled with cryptic notes, numbers, initials, and symbols she didn't recognize. At the back of the notebook was a keycard labeled Orion. Eleanor's breath caught. She had just stumbled upon something vital, but she didn't yet know how to use it. She snapped photos of the notebook's contents with her phone before carefully returning everything to its place. The following day, Clara confirmed Eleanor's suspicions. The keycard was access to a private facility linked to Orion Ventures, a secure location where the syndicate conducted its most sensitive transactions. "If we can get inside, we might find the evidence we need to expose them," Clara said. "But it's risky. These places are heavily monitored. And if you're caught—" "I won't be caught," Eleanor interrupted, her voice steady. "I'm doing this, Clara. I need to protect my family." Clara nodded, her expression grim. "Then we need a plan." The plan came together over the next few days. Clara used her connections to gather intel on the facility, a nondescript building in an industrial part of the city. Security was tight, but the keycard would grant Eleanor access to the first level. From there, she would need to rely on her wits to navigate the rest. On the night of the operation, Eleanor dressed in dark, unassuming clothing and carried only what she needed: the keycard, a small flashlight, and a burner phone to communicate with Clara. As she approached the facility, her heart pounded in her chest, but her resolve never wavered. The keycard worked flawlessly, granting her entry to a dimly lit hallway. She moved quickly but cautiously, following the map Clara had provided. The air was cold and sterile, the silence broken only by the hum of security cameras. When she reached the main server room, Eleanor's breath caught. Rows of monitors displayed financial data, transaction logs, and encrypted communications. She inserted a USB drive Clara had given her into one of the terminals and began downloading the files. Suddenly, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Eleanor's heart raced as she ducked behind a desk, her pulse thundering in her ears. A guard entered the room, his flashlight sweeping the area. She held her breath, praying he wouldn't see her. After what felt like an eternity, the guard left. Eleanor emerged from her hiding spot, quickly retrieving the USB and making her way back to the exit. Her hand shook as she swiped the keycard one last time. stepping out into the cool night air. She had done it. When Eleanor returned home, she handed the USB to Clara, who immediately began analyzing the data. What they found was damning. Detailed records of illegal transactions, names of high-profile individuals involved, and even a list of the syndicate's next targets. "This is it," Clara said, her voice filled with both awe and dread. "This is the kind of evidence that could bring them down." Eleanor nodded, though the weight of what she had done pressed heavily on her. She had crossed a line, one that couldn't be uncrossed, but she knew it was necessary, for her family, for herself. As the first rays of dawn broke through the horizon, Eleanor made a silent vow. She would see this through to the end, no matter the cost. Breaking the chains. Eleanor stared at the flickering glow of Clara's laptop screen, the weight of the evidence before her pressing down like a physical force. Every transaction, every encrypted communication, every name implicated in the Orion Ventures network painted a grim picture of how far-reaching and insidious the syndicate's influence had become. The evidence was enough to bring them to their knees, but at a cost. It wasn't just Nathan's name on the line anymore. Her entire family's legacy could be obliterated if this went public. The stakes had never been higher, and Eleanor knew there was no turning back. The following morning, Eleanor was summoned to the Family Foundation's board meeting. These sessions were typically routine, a chance for the trustees to review grants, investments, and public-facing initiatives. But today's meeting had an edge of tension Eleanor hadn't felt before. The room was a picture of understated opulence, with mahogany walls and a long, polished table that reflected the faces of the powerful men and women seated around it. Eleanor's father's portrait hung above the head of the table, a reminder of the family's storied past. Nathan, as usual, sat in his commanding position at the head, his expression calm but distant. "Before we proceed with today's agenda," Nathan began, his voice smooth as silk, "I'd like to address some rumors that have been circulating regarding the Foundation's finances." Eleanor froze, her heart pounding. Was he already aware of her actions? Nathan continued, "I want to assure everyone here that the Foundation's operations are completely above board. Any discrepancies you may have heard about are simply the result of routine audits." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, but Eleanor couldn't help noticing the slight shift in Nathan's posture, a subtle unease he was trying to mask. As the meeting progressed, Eleanor's mind raced. Nathan's words confirmed one thing. He was aware that cracks in his carefully constructed facade were starting to show. But instead of coming clean, he was doubling down, using the Foundation's reputation to shield his deception. By the time the meeting adjourned, Eleanor's resolve had hardened. Nathan's actions weren't just reckless. They were dangerous. She couldn't wait any longer. That evening, Eleanor met Clara at a secluded park. The USB containing the Orion Ventures data was now securely encrypted and backed up across multiple locations, but they both knew the syndicate wouldn't rest until they silenced anyone who had access to it. "We need to release this," Clara said, her voice urgent. "The longer we wait, the more time they have to cover their tracks." "I know," Eleanor replied, her voice steady. "But we can't just dump this into the public domain. If we do, the wrong people will get hurt. Nathan, he's complicit, but he's not the mastermind. There are bigger players involved." Clara frowned. "So what's the plan?" Eleanor's gaze hardened. "We leak just enough to expose the syndicate's operations, but we keep the identities of certain players, like Nathan, off the radar. For now." "That's risky," Clara warned. "If the syndicate suspects you're protecting him, they'll come after you harder." Eleanor nodded, the weight of the decision clear. "I'll deal with the consequences. I'm not just fighting for Nathan. I'm fighting for Alice, Gavin, and the future of our family." Over the next week, Eleanor and Clara worked tirelessly to prepare the evidence for release. They enlisted the help of a trusted journalist, Mark Townsend, who had built a reputation for taking down powerful figures with airtight investigative reporting. Mark's initial reaction to the data was one of shock. This could topple half the financial elite in the country, he said, scrolling through the files. But you're sure about this? Once it's out there, there's no going back. We're sure, Eleanor replied, her voice firm. But we need you to focus on the syndicate itself, not the pawns they've manipulated. Start with Orion Ventures and the offshore accounts. The rest will fall into place. Mark nodded, his expression grim. Understood. As the story began to take shape, Eleanor noticed a shift in Nathan's behavior. He grew more withdrawn, spending long hours locked in his office or away on business trips he refused to elaborate on. The tension between them was palpable, but Eleanor maintained her composure, knowing the storm was about to break. One evening, as she was tucking Gavin into bed, he looked up at her with wide, innocent eyes. "Mom, is everything okay? You've been different lately." Eleanor's heart ached at the question. Gavin was only 12, too young to understand the weight of the secrets she was carrying. She brushed a hand through his hair, offering a reassuring smile. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. I'm just busy with some things, but I promise, everything I'm doing is for you and Alice." He nodded, seeming comforted, but Eleanor felt the sting of guilt. Her children deserved better than this chaos, and she vowed to give it to them, no matter the cost. The day the story broke, the world seemed to hold its breath. Mark's exposé, published under the headline, "Inside the Web of Orion Ventures," the syndicate controlling global finance, sent shockwaves through the media. The article detailed the syndicate's operations, their use of shell companies to launder billions, and their influence over key industries. As Eleanor watched the news coverage from her living room, her phone buzzed with messages and calls. Friends, acquaintances, even distant relatives reached out, their reactions ranging from disbelief to outrage. But one message stood out. A single text from Nathan. "We need to talk. Now." When Nathan arrived home that evening, his usual composure was gone. He stormed into the living room, his face flushed with anger. "What have you done?" he demanded. Eleanor stood her ground, meeting his gaze with unflinching resolve. "I did what you refused to do. I exposed the truth." Nathan's hands clenched into fists. "Do you have any idea what you've unleashed? The people behind this, they won't stop until they've destroyed us." "They've already destroyed us," Eleanor shot back, her voice rising. "You put our family in danger the moment you got involved with them. I'm just trying to clean up the mess you made." For a moment, Nathan seemed to deflate, the fight draining out of him. "I never wanted this," he said quietly. I thought I could control it, that I could protect you and the kids." "You didn't protect us," Eleanor replied, her voice soft but firm. "You betrayed us." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken truths. Finally, Nathan spoke again, his voice trembling. "What happens now?" Eleanor took a deep breath, her gaze steady. "Now we fight. Together. If you're willing to help, we can bring down the rest of the syndicate. But if you're not, then I'll do it on my own." Nathan hesitated, the weight of his choices visible in his expression. Then, slowly, he nodded. "I'll help." That night marked the beginning of a fragile alliance. For the first time in years, Eleanor and Nathan worked together, not as husband and wife, but as two people determined to protect their family and dismantle the forces that had ensnared them. But Eleanor knew the road ahead would be treacherous. The syndicate wouldn't go down without a fight, and the danger to her family was far from over. The final gambit. The tension in the Grayson household was palpable as Eleanor and Nathan began their fragile collaboration. Their alliance was built on necessity rather than trust, and every interaction was underscored by years of betrayal and resentment. Yet, as they sifted through the mountain of evidence Clara and Eleanor had gathered, a mutual determination began to emerge. The stakes were too high for personal grudges. Clara, ever the pragmatist, established a secure base of operations in a rented office downtown. The space was sparse but functional, with whiteboards covered in flowcharts, timelines, and names. The USB drives containing the Orion Ventures files were stored in a fireproof safe, and Clara had enlisted a trusted tech expert, Ethan, to decrypt and analyze additional layers of encrypted data they hadn't yet accessed. Eleanor stood at the center of it all, her presence commanding but quietly resolute. She had shed the role of the polished socialite and embraced her newfound purpose as a fighter. Every name she uncovered, every piece of the puzzle she pieced together, was a step closer to dismantling the syndicate that had entangled her family. An unexpected development. One morning, Clara burst into the office, her face a mixture of triumph and concern. "We've got a lead," she announced, setting her laptop on the table. The screen displayed a series of documents Ethan had uncovered, each marked with a distinctive crest, a silver falcon clutching a crown. "What is this?" Nathan asked, leaning over her shoulder. "The falcon crest is the emblem of an ultra-exclusive group within the syndicate," Clara explained. "They call themselves the Apex. They're not just facilitators. They're the decision-makers. If Orion Ventures is the web, the Apex is the spider." Eleanor frowned, her mind racing. "How do we use this?" Clara clicked through a series of files, landing on an email chain between two Apex members. "They're planning a summit in 2 weeks, an off-the-record gathering to discuss strategy in light of the Orion expose." "Where?" Nathan asked, his tone sharp. "A private estate in the Hamptons," Clara replied. "And here's the kicker. One of the attendees is Helena Ward." Eleanor's breath hitched. Helena had been Nathan's handler, the one who had drawn him into the syndicate's web. Confronting her directly was a risk, but it was also an opportunity to unravel the syndicate's power structure from the inside. "We need to get into that summit," Eleanor said, her voice firm. Nathan hesitated. "Eleanor, these people are dangerous. If they even suspect we're not on their side, they won't hesitate to." "I know the risks," she interrupted, her gaze unyielding. "But this is our chance to take them down." A dangerous plan. Over the next week, the team devised a plan to infiltrate the summit. Nathan, whose connections to the syndicate remained intact, would leverage his status to secure an invitation. Eleanor, posing as his wife, would accompany him. Clara and Ethan would operate remotely, providing real-time intel and backup. The plan was fraught with danger. The Apex was known for its ruthlessness, and the summit would be heavily guarded. If anything went wrong, Eleanor and Nathan would be trapped with no way out. Despite the risks, Eleanor felt a strange sense of clarity. For the first time, she was confronting the forces that had controlled her life for so long. She was no longer a bystander in her own story. She was taking the reins. The summit. The estate in the Hamptons was a sprawling mansion surrounded by high walls and state-of-the-art security. Eleanor and Nathan arrived in a black-town car, their nerves masked by carefully cultivated poise. Eleanor wore a sleek black dress, her emerald necklace shimmering under the soft glow of the estate's exterior lights. Nathan, in a tailored suit, looked every bit the part of a high-powered executive. As they stepped into the grand foyer, Eleanor's eyes darted around, taking in the crowd. The guests were a mix of polished elites, politicians, CEOs, and media moguls, all mingling with an air of unshakable confidence. It was a stark reminder of the syndicate's reach and influence. Helena Ward was easy to spot. She stood near the fireplace, a vision of calculated elegance in a crimson gown. Her sharp eyes scanned the room like a hawk surveying its prey. "Stick to the plan," Nathan murmured as they approached her. Helena's lips curved into a sly smile as they drew near. "Nathan," she said, her tone dripping with familiarity. "And Eleanor." "What a delightful surprise." Eleanor returned the smile, masking her disdain. "Helena, it's been too long." The conversation that followed was a masterclass in subtext. Helena probed for weaknesses, her questions laced with veiled threats. Eleanor countered with practiced charm, refusing to give an inch. All the while, Nathan played his part, deflecting suspicion with ease, uncovering the truth. As the night wore on, Nathan excused himself to join a private discussion with several Apex members, leaving Eleanor to navigate the crowd alone. Taking advantage of the moment, she slipped away, her heart pounding as she made her way to the upper levels of the mansion. Clara's voice crackled in her earpiece. "You're clear for now, but you need to move quickly. The office should be down the hall to your left." Eleanor reached the office, a luxurious space lined with bookshelves and antique furniture. She approached the desk, her fingers trembling as she inserted a USB drive into the computer. Clara guided her through the process of accessing the files, each click bringing them closer to the heart of the syndicate's operations. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed outside the door. Eleanor's pulse quickened as she scrambled to hide, slipping behind a heavy curtain just as the door opened. Helena's voice filled the room, low and sharp. "I know someone's been digging into Oran. If Nathan's wife is involved, we'll deal with her." Eleanor's breath caught. Helena's words were a chilling reminder of the danger she was in. She stayed perfectly still as Helena rifled through the desk, her movements deliberate and methodical. After what felt like an eternity, Helena left, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Eleanor emerged from her hiding spot, her hands shaking, but her resolve unbroken. She retrieved the USB drive, ensuring the files were intact, and slipped out of the room. The escape. Rejoining Nathan in the main hall, Eleanor whispered urgently, "We need to leave. Now." Nathan nodded, sensing the urgency in her tone. Together, they made their way to the exit, their movements calm but purposeful. As they stepped outside, the cool night air hit Eleanor like a wave of relief. Clara's voice came through the earpiece. "Did you get it?" Eleanor allowed herself a small smile. "We got it." The files Eleanor had retrieved contained the final piece of the puzzle, a comprehensive list of the Apex's members, their operations, and their financial networks. It was the kind of evidence that could dismantle the syndicate once and for all. But as they drove away from the estate, Eleanor knew the fight wasn't over. The syndicate wouldn't go down quietly, and the road ahead would be fraught with danger. Still, for the first time in years, she felt a spark of hope. She had taken the first steps toward breaking the chains that had bound her family, and she wasn't about to stop now. The reckoning. The air in the Grayson household was electric with tension as Eleanor, Nathan, Clara, and Ethan gathered in the dining room turned war room. The files Eleanor had extracted from the Apex Summit sat on Clara's laptop, a ticking time bomb of evidence that could unravel one of the most powerful syndicates in the world. But with power came danger, and they all knew the syndicate wouldn't let them expose their secrets without a fight. Eleanor stood at the head of the table, her presence commanding. Her transformation from a wealthy socialite to a fierce protector of her family had been hard-fought. And now, with the finish line in sight, she refused to falter. "Let's review," Eleanor said, her voice steady but intense. "We have the names of the Apex members, their financial networks, and details of their operations. What's our next move?" Clara leaned forward, tapping the screen of her laptop. "The files are a goldmine, but they're too complex to release as is. We need to simplify the data and target key players first. If we expose too much at once, they'll bury us in lawsuits and misinformation campaigns." Nathan, who had been uncharacteristically silent, finally spoke. "We need to take this to someone who can act on it. The FBI, Interpol, someone with the resources to dismantle the syndicate." Ethan, the tech expert, frowned. "That's a double-edged sword. If the syndicate has connections inside those agencies, and they probably do, it could tip them off before we're ready. We need to be strategic." Eleanor nodded. "Then we need to do both. We'll work with journalists to control the narrative while preparing to hand the evidence to law enforcement. But we can't trust just anyone. Clara, do you have any contacts we can rely on?" Clara's lips curved into a grim smile. "I know a few people who hate the syndicate as much as we do. I'll reach out." Unleashing the truth. Over the next few days, the team worked around the clock. Clara's journalist contacts, including Mark Townsend, were brought back into the fold, their determination reignited by the scope of the new evidence. Ethan set up a secure digital platform to distribute key files to trusted allies, ensuring the information couldn't be erased or contained if the syndicate attempted to intervene. Nathan, for his part, reached out to former associates he believed could be allies. It was a gamble. Some of these individuals were as morally ambiguous as Nathan himself, but desperation drove him to take the risk. For the first time in years, he was trying to make amends, and Eleanor couldn't deny the sincerity in his efforts. As the pieces fell into place, Eleanor prepared herself for the inevitable backlash. The syndicate wouldn't go down without a fight, and she knew they would target her family to regain control. The counterattack. The storm hit sooner than expected. 2 nights before the planned release of the evidence, the Grayson estate was breached. Eleanor awoke to the sound of shattering glass and muffled shouts. Her heart raced as she grabbed her phone, immediately dialing Clara. "They're here," she whispered, her voice trembling but controlled. "Stay calm," Clara replied, her voice sharp with urgency. "Get the kids and get out. I'm sending help." Eleanor moved swiftly through the darkened halls, her instincts kicking in. She found Alice and Gavin in their rooms, wide-eyed and terrified. "What's going on?" Alice whispered as Eleanor pulled her into a tight embrace. "No time to explain," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We need to leave." Nathan met them in the hallway, his face pale but resolute. "I'll hold them off," he said, handing Eleanor a set of car keys. "Get the kids to safety." "No," Eleanor snapped, gripping his arm. "We do this together." Nathan hesitated, then nodded, the unspoken truce between them stronger than ever. A narrow escape. The Graysons slipped out through a side entrance, the chaos inside the estate masking their movements. Clara's backup, a pair of trusted operatives, arrived just in time, ushering them into an unmarked van. As the vehicle sped away, Eleanor glanced back at the estate, her heart sinking at the sight of flames licking at the edges of the building. "They'll pay for this," she murmured, her hands clenched into fists. The turning point. The attack galvanized the team. The Graysons were relocated to a safe house, where they continued their efforts to expose the syndicate. Clara arranged a meeting with a high-ranking FBI agent, Agent Rebecca Harlow, who had a reputation for taking down organized crime syndicates. Harlow was a woman of sharp intellect and unflinching resolve. She listened intently as Eleanor and Clara presented their evidence, her expression growing graver with each revelation. "This is explosive," Harlow said, her tone measured. "But you're right to be cautious. If even one person in my division is compromised, this operation could fall apart." "What do you need from us?" Eleanor asked. "Time," Harlow replied. "I'll assemble a task force, but we need to move carefully. In the meantime, keep building public pressure. The more eyes on this, the harder it will be for the syndicate to silence us." The final blow. The day of the public release arrived under a heavy sky, the threat of rain mirroring the tension in the air. Eleanor stood before a sea of reporters, her presence commanding despite the exhaustion etched on her face. Cameras clicked and flashed as she stepped up to the podium, her voice clear and unwavering. "For too long, the Apex Syndicate has operated in the shadows, manipulating industries, governments, and lives," she began. "Today, we say enough. We will no longer be pawns in their game. We will no longer allow them to wield power unchecked." As Eleanor spoke, Clara and Ethan activated the secure platform, releasing the evidence to trusted journalists and organizations worldwide. Within minutes, the files began to circulate, their content sparking outrage and calls for action. The syndicate's response was swift and brutal. Threats poured in, and attempts to discredit Eleanor and her team filled the airwaves. But the evidence was irrefutable, and the tide of public opinion turned against the powerful couple. A new beginning. In the weeks that followed, arrests were made, alliances crumbled, and the syndicate's influence waned. Agent Harlow's task force executed raids on key Apex locations, seizing assets and dismantling their operations piece by piece. Eleanor and Nathan, though still estranged, found a measure of peace in their shared victory. Nathan entered witness protection, his testimony crucial in the prosecution of several Apex members. Alice and Gavin, though scared by the ordeal, began to heal, their bond with Eleanor stronger than ever. Clara, ever the relentless investigator, continued her work, determined to root out the remnants of the syndicate. And Eleanor, though forever changed, emerged as a symbol of courage and resilience. As she stood on the balcony of her temporary home, watching the sunrise, Eleanor allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The battle had been long and grueling, but she had reclaimed her life and her family's future. The chains that had bound her for so long were broken, and in their place was a newfound freedom, a freedom she had fought for and won.